So for President Trump and Republicans, the big question is, how do they put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Senior political analyst Britt Hume is here tonight with some thoughts on that. Good evening, Britt.
Hi, Shannon. Well, it's not at all clear to me that they can put it back together again. The damage from this action on Friday and the failure of this bill to pass is likely to be quite long-lasting for a couple of reasons. One is that one of the things this bill would have done, had they managed to pass it and eventually get it through the Senate, was that it would have created some budget space, which is under Congress's arcane budget rules, is necessary when you're trying to legislate on taxes, which is supposed to be the next thing up. And this bill had some budget savings in it, which were significant enough to make it much easier to do tax reform, because the worry about tax reform always is you're going to reduce some taxes and you're going to try to come out in such a way that you don't add to the deficit. That's hard to do. If you have some budget savings as a result of another bill, as this was, it makes the job much easier. So this job, just as a practical matter, becomes much harder. Not to mention the fact that it's not at all clear that the Republican caucus, with this rump group that seems determined to say no to almost anything, which has been true for some years now, I might add, is not a dependable ally. So the job going forward for the next thing becomes much harder. Not to mention, Shannon, the fact that when you do tax reform, you're going to gore some oxes. There are going to be special interest groups who are going to lose their tax breaks, and they're going to lobby Washington to beat the band. On top of that, of course, is the fact that you're not going to get much, if any, Democratic support. So you've got to kind of try to do this with Republican votes only, or almost exclusively. That's tough. So this road ahead is hard, and it's just been made harder.
Well, Britt, do you see any historical context for this, how presidents in the past have faced something similar and managed to get the band back together?
Well, I'm trying to think of a time when a president, with his first item on his agenda, the top item on the agenda, has failed this spectacularly and this early. And I frankly can't think of one. I think it's almost unprecedented, and I think that I'll say this about it that's worth mentioning. I think the president evidenced something that some might have not thought him capable, and that is he clearly got the complexities of trying to legislate on an issue like this. And you remember he said he never realized that health care could be so complicated. I think he figured it out, and I think he also understood the budget rules under which they were trying to operate, and necessarily had to. He seemed to get that too. He also seemed smart enough to recognize where the blame lay. You know, he blamed Democrats. Well, their opposition was a given, I think, Shannon, but he was also wise enough to see, I think, that the votes of the House Freedom Caucus, which he should have been able to depend on and couldn't, were a huge factor here. So the president seems to be learning as he goes, and he's not going to give up. He never has. So maybe he can find a way forward, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the big things they're going to have to tackle next, which of course what they're trying to do is tax reform. I thought it was interesting that the Freedom Caucus chair, Representative Mark Meadows, said he didn't necessarily need to see them as being revenue neutral, that there didn't have to be specific offsets. It sounds a little less conservative than the position they had on health care. Does that make you think they might be able to get that done?
Well, yeah, but the conservative view is not to add to the deficit. So now what we have here is the guy saying, and look, and remember this, that you can't just pass this through the House. You have to also consider what's going to happen in the Senate. You're not going to get much help from Democrats on this in all likelihood if you're going to pass a conservative version of tax reform. So they have to consider something that could be put through the Senate under the budget process. And there are lots of rules attached to that have to do with spending and taxation and the deficit. So for him to say airily, as he apparently did, that, well, we don't need to worry about that, that's wrong. You do have to worry about that if you're going to legislate in this arena. But this is what we're dealing with here. There's a sort of a pie-in-the-sky quality to what a lot of these members in that group seem to favor. They're always in favor of some bill other than the one before them, or some bill that couldn't be passed if it were brought to the floor. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Mm-hmm. All right, Britt Hume, always good to have your insights. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. You bet.